Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Acro's Good Clinical Podcast. Today on GCP, I am joined by Nicole Stansbury, SVP Global Clinical Operations at Premier Research, representing Acro, and Maddie Whitehead, RBQM Product and People Lead at Roche, representing Trancelerate Biopharma. Nicole and Maddie are here today to talk about the collaborative work on ICH E6R3 that Acro and Trancelerate are doing together. Maddie and Nicole will walk us through the key concepts of the new guidance, what has changed from R2 to R3, and the challenges and opportunities presented by this update. Enjoy! So Maddie and Nicole, thanks so much for joining me today on Acro's Good Clinical Podcast to talk about the impact of ICH E6R3 on the other GCP, Good Clinical Practice. Before we jump into R3, I figured we should give folks a quick background on ICH E6. So R2 went into effect in 2017, and in May 2023, ICH released an updated version known as R3. We're anticipating Annex 2 mid-2024, and then the new guidelines will go into effect in 2025. And just for everyone who's maybe kind of new to the Acro Trancelerate sphere, Acro and Trancelerate have had a pretty long-standing relationship. I think we're on close to 10 years now, and we've worked on a variety of issues together over the years, and this is one of those occasions where we thought it was worth it to collaborate. Sponsors and CROs are already working to implement the new guidance within their organizations, and today Nicole and Maddie are here to talk about how that implementation is going and how sponsors and CROs are working together. So let's dive in. You guys have called ICH E6R3 the Thinking Person's GCP. Can you give us a little background on the revision, how it differs from the previous version R2, and maybe highlight some key concepts of the new guideline that may be particularly impactful? Things like, stuff we're talking about all the time, like quality by design and risk-based approaches.
Thank you. I think one of the biggest changes between R2 and R3 is that R3 is less prescriptive. It allows a lot of flexibility into the adoption of risk-based principles and quality by design principles. A couple of examples of that would be the softening of the language related to quality tolerance limits, which was referenced in R2, and they're called acceptable ranges in R3. So giving a lot more flexibility. Also, I think the revisions allow for that critical thinking, as you mentioned. And one of the big changes there, I think, is the use of the word harm and hazard as opposed to errors. Because to me, the harm and hazard means it has to have a negative impact. An error might just have no impact, but it wasn't clarified in R2 that you didn't need to worry about all errors. It really is specifying now that the types of errors we're talking about are errors that cause harm or hazard. And I think that's a big point to help us focus on the things that matter.
Any other thoughts, Maddie? Anything to add?
I agree wholeheartedly, as I always do with Nicole. The real concept around pushing and enabling critical thinking for us to make decisions about what is critical to that specific protocol and to be able to tell the story of the protocol. I think I love the concept that gives control to the sponsor around what is going in, for example, in the TMF and how we look after and clean data. The concept of, as Nicole rightly says, that every error seemed to matter, put a very, very specific slant on how studies have been conducted. Everything had to be perfect. And now what must be protected is what is most important. That fit for purpose approach comes through loud and clear.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I want to talk a little bit about the infographic that Acro and Trancelerate have released. This is, I think, the first co-developed resource from Acro and Trancelerate. So it's very exciting. But this infographic details the differences from R2 to R3 in regards to risk management. Can you tell us a little bit more about this collaboration between our two organizations and what else we're working on together?
Collaboration is very important between sponsors and CROs. If we can't agree on how things should be done, I think we've got not a lot of chance for driving innovation. Sponsors and CROs, in order to drive the innovation in the industry, we have to have discussions, we have to be aligned, And in order to align, these discussions and collaborations, I think, are really important. I think that, having that collaboration and things like this infographic discussed at a high level within the industry takes the obligation of having those discussions outside of each and every project team having to have these debates and discussions at a project team level. And I think it's really important for us to continue to have the discussions and set the example for those everyday project teams that are just trying to get the studies up and running.
Absolutely. One of the things I love about our collaborations is, well, we've got two different lenses coming at the regulation. We really came together to make something really robust that works for everybody. So again, it's fit for purpose. It was very interesting from a sponsor's perspective to really hear from the CRO's perspective and to get that slightly nuanced language that's slightly different. And actually, when I use it internally, it kind of hits better because it is, I think, sometimes a little bit more straightforward. And you've lifted it directly from E6R3 in a way that in a way that I think is really useful for the whole industry. So we've embedded that deeply in both this fantastic infographic and the next one coming sometime in June around control strategies.
It's a great resource, so I really hope people check it out. Shameless plug for the infographic. I want to talk a little bit about implications of this new guideline for, across the industry. We've got a ton of different stakeholders. Are there different impacts for sponsors versus CROs, regulators, and, of course, participants as we think about them in the ecosystem as well?
I definitely think this challenges us to really think about how we've been doing things. It's almost like a call to action for us to be able to go back and look at everything we've put in place over time and almost start again to look at where can we reduce administrative burden in particular. What administrative burden has allowed us to take our eye off of the things that are more critical. We need to be paying attention to things that can devastate a clinical trial or put patient safety at risk. Not every tiny little item. And I think encouraging CROs in particular to go back and look at our procedures and remove some things that we've put in place as almost protective barriers that tend to cripple efficiency. It allows us to redo some of those things with a better and more thought-provoking set of expectations, I think. And I really see this as a call to action.
Absolutely, I agree. I think it puts the patient back at the heart of a clinical trial. That actually I'm not sure we could say that is exactly who's at the heart of our clinical trials right now. That strive for control and perfection that is seen by both the sponsor and the CROs, that again everything has to be perfect. That emphasis has gone out of this regulation. What does the patient want? What are we doing best for the patient? And that really is asking us to do a better job and to collaborate and to speak to people and understand what is wanted rather than we can do it because we can.
Yeah, I think, for participants in particular, the quicker that we can give them access to life-changing therapies in faster and more reliable ways, the better. And that's what really this is all about for all of us, is making sure that we're only doing what is necessary to keep the patient safe and to prove scientifically that the treatment or therapy is working as expected.
And obviously addressing what they need to make their lives better, to support them in their journey through this, whatever it is that they are suffering. And I think that's a fantastic opportunity that we should seize.
Yeah, absolutely. So we kind of touched on opportunities, and I think, every new guidance, whatever it is sort of in the regulatory sphere, presents an opportunity for opportunities and challenges as well. So what do the both of you see as some of those challenges and, additional opportunities for CROs and sponsors that come along with implementing this new guideline?
This is one of my favorite topics because it lets me get on my soapbox about check boxes. It really is giving us the opportunity to move away from everything being a checkbox exercise, tick those boxes without any thought, without any understanding of why we're checking that box. You know, a lot of people perhaps don't understand why we check those boxes. We need to move away from we do this, so we do it, which is our DNA right now. And I'm really excited about watching people think in a new way.
I think the biggest challenge, for us in actually executing towards this in the spirit of this guidance, is really, we can do the administrative things like update our procedural documents and streamline things and say you don't need to do 100% SDR and STP, and yet we don't change. I mean, we can update the papers and the procedures and the guidance, but getting actual people to change what they do is still probably one of the biggest challenges in bringing this type of guidance to life. A lot of it has to do with fear of what happens if I don't do it. I'm afraid I'm going to get in trouble, or we're going to put the study in jeopardy in some way. I think there's fear of, if we don't file something in the eTMF, it's going to be an inspection finding. And I think we can't operate in an environment of fear. That can't be the driving, influence in how we behave and how we administer clinical trials. I think one of the things that we need to be afraid of is that we'll be seen as an industry that's not serving patients and physicians as well as we could. I think that is what we should be more afraid of. Because we're too slow or we're not focused on the things that matter. I think that is the thing that we need to be focused on if we're going to focus on fear, because we like to operate in an environment that is afraid. But I think that's where we really have to make sure that we're focusing, is that we're too slow to deliver what we need for patients and physicians that are participating in these trials.
Absolutely. And I'm really interested because it's a cultural piece, but we hear from the regulators, particularly, for example, the FDA, who are talking about us being more proportionate. They are talking about having an industry that is quicker, that is culturally more agile. So hearing the FDA really having those conversations and actually quite loudly saying it, I think actually is going to spur us to start really moving, because we need to listen to them. The FDA are absolutely spot on. And we're starting to hear it from, I've heard it from the MHRA very, very recently. Let's seize the moment. They are. So let's get on the same bandwagon.
Absolutely. I think, if we can justify and defend the decisions that we're making around a risk-based approach or those other things, that's all they're asking us to do. We shouldn't be afraid of the questions. We should be prepared with the answers, the logic. Again, you said this is the thinking man's guidance, and that is absolutely true. But we need to have put enough thought in the beginning about why we chose the direction that we did, and the strategies that we did, and be able to defend those. And I think there's a lot of benefit to doing that. I mean, we need to be bold. We need to take calculated risks. Otherwise, nothing is going to change. Every single individual has to be bold. It's a very difficult and a day-to-day job when someone has to take responsibility for why we decided to go do something different or new. Why didn't we SDV everything? Who made that decision? We need to be bold, and we need to say, I did. I made the decision, and here's why I made the decision. That, the monitoring strategy was going to be X, Y, or Z, or, someone else. I made the decision that we didn't need to collect that data. It wasn't important to us at the time. I think those are the things that are really good. And I think we need to make sure that we're instilling confidence, through our control strategies. So we talk about this kind of going back to the infographic. The control strategies are what should give us the confidence that we need, so that we're making sure we're all speaking the same language, that we're thinking about things the same way, but bringing it back to that collaboration. And if we're using those control practices, documenting a risk assessment, using knowledge based on historical and previous trials, if we're doing all those things, we've got the guardrails in place that we should feel a bit more comfortable taking some of these calculated risks to drive forward a more efficient and innovative clinical trial.
As you can see, Nicole and I like bold. But we'll stand by it. We're the ones who have to inspire other people through our collaboration, but also through our daily work. And it's, I think Nicole would agree with something we both take very seriously and are actually really excited to have the opportunity, both externally and internally, to be the ones who say, be bold and to try and inspire others to come with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think you two are quite the dynamic duo, so I'm very glad to have you on here today to talk with. But I think that intentionality piece, like you're talking about, why you're making the decisions you're making and standing behind them is so important. So I'm really glad that you guys highlighted that today. We've got one final question, I believe. We've talked through quite a bit. Hopefully we've helped our audience get a handle on R3 and what's to come. But one last question, like I said, how else are CROs and sponsors preparing and developing solution to aid the industry's adoption as we move forward with all the E6 R3 that is to come?
I think one of the things that we need to continue to do is to continue having conversations like these, not only in an industry setting, but, in partnerships between sponsors and CROs, but on individual clinical the studies themselves. Make sure that we've got those cross-functional discussions happening with regard to risk. And then talk about how we're going to handle things proactively if they come up on the study. We're never going to run a perfect trial. That's just not going to happen. But we need to have some conversations early on to say, what are we going to do if there is a quality event? How are we going to define what that quality event is? How are we going to react to it? How are we going to determine the impact? Once we've explained those things and defined those things, then I think we'll figure out what actions we need to take. But I think, as we move into taking on some of these new changes and being more flexible, that means that when something does happen, we can't revert. We can't be so reactionary that we just put, our CAPA is to put everything that we just took out to add flexibility right back in. It really defeats the purpose. I think we've got to be focused on predefined actions that are calm, that are really making sure that we're not taking our eye off of finding the next thing because we're too worried about preventing or stopping, the previous thing. And I think weighing in on how critical that was. Is this going to put patient safety at risk? Is this going to jeopardize the submission or the outcome of the trial? Getting the full cross-functional team pulled in together to weigh in. What does the statistician think? What does the medical monitor think? Let's have some discussions and conversations, and let's try not to be reactionary when we know things will happen, and we just need to be more prepared for how we handle those.
Absolutely. Not everything can or needs a preventative action every single time. We need to be judicious. Again, it goes back to critical thinking. Critically think about what is in front of you. And thinking about data review. Not every piece of data needs to be 100% bleached clean. We can, where some data is not critical data, we can accept some errors. We can accept it not being beautiful. In fact, we should. We should be looking at things in a more real-time data surveillance way, so we can correct things, we can modify things, and our control strategies kick in to bring us back and to keep us within those acceptable ranges. I think that's key. I really like the idea of doing things on a more realistic timeline and not waiting for a retrospective audit to suddenly identify a huge amount of things. Again, there are ways. The data is there. We've just got to use it and pull the story out of it.
I think that's great. And I think, it goes not only for the CRO and the sponsor and the activities we do, but I think we also need to take this amount of grace and flexibility into the sites and the patients as well. We can be very hard hard to work with, I think, sometimes when it comes to sites dealing with deviations that were caused by patients or just through the course of normal clinical practice. I mean, we all know and recognize, I think, inherently that clinical trials are not a clean and sanitary environment. They can be messy. Patients do things and life happens to patients, the dog does eat the homework every now and then. And I think that we need to be, the important thing is that we've got processes and procedures in place to assess what happened and its impact, that we've got processes in place to in particular document what happened and what we did to correct it. I think that's an important storyline, to your point, Maddie, that needs to be told. The documentation and that, that's the important thing. And I think the other thing we need to recognize, is that CRAs and data managers, everyone involved in the process are human. There's going to be some element of human error that comes in, and we can do our best to build checks and balances. We do our best to have layers and layers of review to find things as we filter and clean it. But the goal is never going to be perfection. The goal should be that when something does fall through the cracks, that we've evaluated whether there's harm or hazard. If there is harm, or hazard, those are the things that we want to put in, preventative actions and those kinds of things, and mitigate the chances of those ever happening again. But if it's not a big deal, we should just move on. Otherwise, we're going to miss the next thing, because we're too busy worrying about the tiny thing that didn't matter, and it's going to cause that distraction. And I think that's an important piece. And it is about being sensible and rational in our decision making.
God, I think the ICH would be very happy to be called the graceful good clinical practice. I think that's I think they might take that as their slogan. The striving for perfection is actually causing us to achieve less and be less perfect, because we've raised the burden that we're putting on our participants. We've raised the cost, and we're now slower, and we collect copious amounts of data. So we are now so burdensome to ourselves that we are not achieving what we're actually aiming, our overall objective, which is to improve lives of patients. And I think being more open and being transparent is actually the way we should be going as an industry. And I think there is the will and the drive to get there. And Nicole and I will spearhead it individually if we have to, but I think it really is the drive to get there. And I think that we can do an amazing job by being open, by being transparent, and these type of conversations happening as part of our daily lives.
Yeah, we just have to get out of our own way a little bit sometimes.
Yes,
I think with this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We should stop overthinking.
Exactly. So simple. Just stop overthinking. It's that simple. Simple. I mean, you guys have hit all the main questions I wanted to ask and really cover with you today. This has been super illuminating for me personally, and I hope for everyone listening as well. This has been so fun. I have a feeling we'll have you both back on at some point to talk about whatever we see in the future, maybe a little bit in the fall, as things kind of are released. We'll see what happens. But this has been so much fun. Thank you both so much for joining me. Anytime we can get you two together is always a good time. So thanks so much. Hope everyone's enjoyed listening. And we'll see you in the next episode, I guess.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Be sure to join me back here next Tuesday when I sit down with Dr. Susie McCune from PPD, part of Thermo Fisher Scientific, and Jackie Whiteway from ICON as they walk me through some of the challenges and opportunities that exist in the pediatric clinical trial space. Thanks.